Hi, I'm Karin Hurd, and I'm here with our next edition of Asking for a Friend. And I am very excited about today's show. We have Colin Hunter joining us, and he is the author of Be More Wrong. And we're going to be talking about helping your team fail well. How do you mitigate risk? So, Colin, welcome to the show.
Karen, thanks for having me. I was doing a little dance as the music was playing in there, and so hopefully the audience didn't see that. But yeah,
I
love
could
the
see it
music.
behind the scenes, though. So I will like to start where the question that I am asking every single one of my guests this year to start with, what has been one source of real inspiration or strength for you personally as you've managed the last couple of years in this difficult time?
So I've got an interesting one, and not to set the tone of the conversation in a different way, but my father passed away last year, but that was a source of real strength for me because he had Alzheimer's. But I also realized I didn't really know him as well as I could have, and I had to write his eulogy, and I found out stuff that I never knew about my dad in terms of his work as a pediatric cardiologist. So that has been a huge strength to me. It's a loss for the family, but it's been a strength for all of us in terms of celebrating his life. So that's what's happened to me. Yeah.
Wow, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for your loss.
Yeah.
That it's such a challenge, and I'm glad that you were able to go deep with that.
Yeah, it's good. I'm delighted to actually expose parts of his life, and it's part of the book with Be More Wrong is that there's a lot of our lives are focused so much on passion
Mhm.
and make mistakes that sometimes we don't realize the people who are around us and spend enough time just being there. So yeah,
Yeah,
it's good.
yeah. So as we transition into this conversation about being more wrong, I would love to know what inspired you to write this book. What was the motivation?
So I've had a life full of screw ups, Karen. That's what I would say. And it's funny because when I was a child, I used to experiment all the time, whether it was groups of friends or I would start to try and bring one group of friends together with another group of friends, and those experiments never really worked. But I lost that, and I lost that in my 20s and went into a corporate career and suddenly got into being serious, being an adult, and I realized I'd lost myself. So the 10 years that led up to a time when I had a major life event that caused me to reshape it, that's when I started to realize that I'd been hellishly wrong all the way up to that. So how do I find my child again? How do I find my passion again? And therefore, my whole life since then has been about that journey to be more wrong and use my screw ups to help others. Yeah.
Mm. What do you think that we should be more wrong about?
Well, that's all very personal. I think that's what I love about Be More Wrong is that it's you've got to fail forward towards a purpose or a philosophy that you're going for. So, for example, this year, I'm taking on increasing equity in society, so decision-making choices for people's careers. So that's a passion, that's a purpose. Now, that is a very contentious field. It's a very almost a pressurized field to go into. So as long as the purpose and your philosophy and the true north you're holding is good, then that's where you should head towards. So what I would encourage you not to do is try fail towards something that you aren't motivated, you're not passionate about, because that's when failure really hurts deep. And sometimes is very difficult to recover from. So yeah, always fail forward towards something and a purpose. Yeah.
So how do you do that? How do you fail forward?
So I've talking about COVID and everything that we've been going through the last 2 years. So one of the things I've been working with is one of the areas of our leadership model is around personal drive, resilience, and we base it around anti-fragile. So the concept of how do I give myself a little bit of a stretch towards growing resilience. The definition of resilience is the ability to thrive in chaos. So
Mhm.
personally, what I've been doing is experimenting with new practices. So we have a model about that we've borrowed from James Clear's work, which is how do I adopt new practices that become habitual, that feed systems.
Okay.
So personally, I've been working on a regime for myself, a 5:30 start, a workout followed by headspace, followed by Pilates. And then I've added new practices in on top of it and simple things like a gratitude journal, a habit tracker. And even this year, I've been practicing around storytelling for my personal inner drive. And therefore, I wrote a letter to myself this year dated 31st of December 22, about what this year would look like. New practice, which I'm going to keep on as a habit, the rest of the team have done. So that piece about practicing and experimenting is what I'm doing at the moment, and measuring weather with if you can see this, an Oura ring that I've got on here, measuring my level of sleep, my breath, my heart rate, in terms of doing that and seeing the impact on me. So that's one area.
Interesting. It's funny that you mentioned that letter. Before starting Let's Grow Leaders, I was at Verizon for 20 years. And
Nice.
one of those roles, I led a 2,200 person sales team. And
wow.
when I was doing that, one of my best practices is at the beginning of the year, I had every district manager write a letter to me about their accomplishments for the end of the year. So it had to go something like this. Dear Karin, this has been the best year of my career because I accomplished this. I built these, invested in these relationships, and I had different prompts that they did. And then in the mid-year, we would take out those letters and we would see how it was going. And then at the end of the year, we would reflect back. And of course, sometimes people were, they set these really aspirational things and they didn't accomplish it all. But I will tell you, people told me that practice, that visioning exercise, they accomplished a heck of a lot of those things.
If I'd only known you then, Karin, I could have done this earlier. What I love about that, and we've got a subtle variation, which I picked up from a podcast I was listening to, was you write the letter to yourself, but also it's almost a pre-mortem, as we would call it, which is, what did you find difficult? What did you screw up on in the year? Where were your real stretch points? So when my team are now writing theirs to me to come back, I'm looking for them to say, this is going to be a real stretch. I'm going to fly this, but this is where I'm going to really have a stretch. So we're starting to build in the failure and the stretch into their letters as well. So I love that.
That's interesting. Yeah. So anticipate, because it's making you anticipate where things could go wonky.
Yeah.
And then
what's going to face us? Yeah.
So, this concept of being more wrong is tricky. And it's been interesting as we've been working with our clients. Risk taking is a value that I am seeing start to emerge more than it has in the past. And, to the extent that some of the folks that we're working with, they have a whole program of, we want to take more risks.
Yep.
And that is very tricky because some risks are really risky. And, so how do you encourage this value of it's okay to fail as long as you're failing forward, as long as you're learning? And there are certain things that we really can't screw up around here. And so I'm curious how you scaffold that and how you build that into a culture.
So that's a long question, probably longer than half an hour, but I'm going to go for a short version of it. So the first thing is, for me, is when you think about how you fail, normally we fail internally in our business. So we fail internally in our business, or we stretch ourselves, and then we try to look perfect to the client. So the first thing for me is inviting your client into that failure. So we've worked with two particular clients that we have, just chatting to one of them earlier today, where we've invited them into the failure, but we call it learn fast. So how can we learn fast? How can we stretch each year? How can we move forward? But we do that in partnership. So there's an old expression that one of my clients once gave me, which is, when things are going well, go and tell your client. When things are going badly, run and tell your client. So the philosophy of risk is that you put that in with the client, and they have permission to be refreshingly direct, as we call it with us, to come quickly and talk to us. We will talk quickly to them if it looks like it's a failure. But we also involve, in our role, we also involve the participants in the programs to say, we're stretching, we're trying something new. So once you start to give permission to your clients, participants, to get involved in it, it becomes less of a risk because it's a shared risk stretch and they benefit from it. So that's a key part. It's not always possible. So the second part of that, we do a lot of work with internal audit functions, compliance, risk functions, and we use the word assurance. So how do you provide assurance that the level of risk you are taking in any particular situation is right? But we talk about small experiments, low cost, low risk, short space of time. And that's a key mindset for them, particularly in financial services where the risk is huge. Yeah.
Yes. I love that. I'm a big believer in the power of a pilot. Let's try this thing before we commit all, the whole So we have a question coming in, and if you're just joining us here, we're here with Colin Hunter, and we're talking about how do you encourage risk taking? How do you help your team to fail forward? Any questions related to that? Would love to have you chat them in, and we'll take this first one from David. And gosh, I've been in this situation. I know David has as well. Asking for a friend as a leader, how to be more wrong when your manager isn't particularly forgiving and responds poorly to being wrong.
Oh, that's a tough one. Yeah, first question in. So I have a good friend who gave me a philosophy this year, which is do your team own their role or rent their role? Yeah. So we've started to talk about that. You've got to take responsibility for your own role. You've got to take responsibility for your own choice of where you're working, who you're working for. So that's the first bit. So for me, even if my manager wasn't that comfortable, I've also got to buy them into the fact that I'm owning my role. I'm not renting. I'm not seeing them as a landlord that I'm asking questions, permission for, that I'm creating my space. But also when you get into there, you've also got to have your systems in place to be effective in those. So we talk about 4 systems. One is relationships. So have you got an engaged and diverse, psychologically safe group of connections who will support and work with you? Therefore, you're doing your hard work with your manager can see that you're working with the right people. I think the second bit is that you've got a very clear story that you're working on, and therefore they can see the true north. They can see the direction you're heading in, and they can also see that the energy and the personal bit that you're putting into there. I think the other bit for me is involving your manager in the decision making. So we have an advisory board here for our business. So your manager, treat them as an advisory board to help you. So when you're experimenting, buy them into what you're experimenting with, and then get them to help you to be it, for them to be the decision maker around whether it's working or not. And say, look, we expect 80% of failures in these small experiments. So I'd love to involve and buy you into it. But I think the final bit, and this is where the risk is you're inviting them to be the mentor and coach for you and the guide. And so many people don't work with their manager. Now, some people's managers, leaders, are not good. But where they have a glimmer of hope with them, it's actually buying them in to be the mentor and coach and the guide for them on this journey. If you do that, then normally they will buy in, especially when you are successful through failure. Yeah.
Nice, nice. I've been thinking a lot about being wrong, even if you were right. And what do I mean by this? The world is shifting so quickly. And how do you have resilience? So you might have had the perfect strategy and your team is moving along and they're executing well. We call it mind the MIT. They're focusing on the most important things. Something shifts and this strategy that was right is suddenly wrong. And they are having to, and there's this sense of demoralization. And, I'm hearing from clients like, gosh, we had one manager say to the other day, this is the 4th time I've had to tell somebody to abort a project.
Yeah.
And they quit because they were just so frustrated with that. And so I'm wondering your thoughts on how do you stay resilient and nimble and be okay to say, even though I was right, I was wrong. And how do you recover so you have that energy to work again?
Yeah, for me, I think it's about the network you surround yourself with. I couldn't do this with, for example, we wrote our narrative for the business, and the bit we wrote, which is everybody's watched Lord of the Rings, where Frodo and Sam in Mordor, and they're walking around, they come back to the same place. And we have a concept, which is we're walking around in circles. So therefore, we have this principle in that when something fails, it's the network around us that will help us get us out of that. And therefore, for me, it's involving a group of people in there, firstly. There's also, if you think about most things, they're dependent on other people why they failed, so the clients. So we've had a program canceled this year for the first time, and that's been running for 15, 20 years.
Oh, wow.
But for me, it will happen next year. But we got to a point where in some ways, we weren't eating our own dog food. Yeah, we weren't in there working. We almost got complacent in how we operate. But because of the relationship with the client, we were able to involve them in saying, look, hands up. Yeah, we got complacent. And hands up, actually, there's some stuff on your side that was complacent. There's people changing, all those things. But those are excuses. Let's take accountability, responsibility. Now, that's easier said than done. Because in the background, that's £70,000 gone down the drain. Don't know what that's in dollars, but that's a lot of money for a program. However, if you are working your systems in the right way, in theory, you're not to the point that that's going to cause your business to fall over. Yeah.
Yeah. So as you're thinking about, so let's talk about if you are, you're a project manager or you're a frontline supervisor, how do you make this practical in the way, how do you look at your daily work, your projects that you're working on, and how do you encourage this in your team? Do you have some practical advice if I'm leading a small group, which I
Yep.
know we have some folks on listening who will be lead in that position. What advice do you have there?
So I have a couple of things in my mind. I think you've got to buy them into the overall journey that you're going on. So we were talking about letters before, getting the letters and the brief back, check back, we call it. So giving them the sense of direction, writing your letter first as a manager about where you're going. And it doesn't need to be a letter. It can be your strategy. It can be where we're going to play this year. So first is getting that out there so they're clear, but also getting them to brief back at that point around what they've heard and what they believe in that they're supposed to be doing. And that allows you to check back. So I think clarity is a key piece that we would always start with in that. I think the other thing is that you've got to live your life with your team in a series of experiments. So if you're turning up expecting to do the same thing every day in the same way, then you're not living this. So for example, we will rotate the person who leads meetings. We will think about each week, we'll think about one or two things we're going to change and work with. So if you can start to get the small things, the habits, the rituals that are in your team to be experiments, to trial something. So we have a pulse each morning at 9:15 in the morning. We all check in, we tell about what we're going to do in that day for half an hour. Now, a while ago, we decided we would experiment and remove that down to 1 or 2 days a week. It didn't work. We lost connection. We lost a trial. So that's just a simple messaging piece that said, we're experimenting. So we're using the language. So that's the thing is experimenting. The third thing is feedback loop. And for me, you've got to get the right people who own the roles and want to do this. But once they're in there, encourage them to experiment, encourage them to take risks. And once you've got the feedback loop, we just have simple feedback messages, which is I like, I wish, I wonder. So in other words, you remove the performance management from it, you remove it into, and you move it into a conversation, which is I like this, what you did here. I wish, yeah, something would be different. And I wonder whether there's something. Now, just by even using Michael Bungay-Stanya's questions from Coaching Habit, what's on your mind, adding those questions, I like, I wish, I wonder in terms of feedback, and then having the conversation on the back end of it, you started a culture where people are thinking, okay, he's okay with me failing. He's okay with me stretching, experimenting. But then you got to celebrate. And I did a post on LinkedIn today where when I published the book, that day, the cake, which was made into the form of the book, I felt at my lowest, on that day, bizarrely. But it was because I'd lost sight of the small day-to-day things I was doing. I had this eye, as somebody put it in the post next to me, in the trail, they said, you had it on too big a prize rather than the small prizes. So the habits of experimenting and the day-to-day changes you embed into your team, not making it too big an experiment, but gradually drip feeding things in that allow people to do it is how we started. Yeah. And now we're screwing up royally with clients and being very successful and winning awards out of it. But they're winning the awards. That's the other thing. We're making the hero to be them in the story. Yeah.
Yeah. Good. Good. So you talk about mindset and mood set. What's that all about?
Well, shout out to Sarah Monroe, who wrote The Shed Method, which, if you haven't read, is a great book. And she works in high performance. And she gave me this recently. And it was first thing everybody says, mindset. So mindset of saying, so failure is okay. But actually, the mood set is important. So even now, my mood set here is I'm thinking I'm holding a glass of wine and I'm holding a cocktail conversation. I'm at a dinner party. So that's how I get my moods to think about how I explore it. So how are you with your team? What mood are you setting in the room? Are you setting a mood of pace? Are you setting a mood of reflection? And everything you do in that space needs to be about mood set. So the mindset is I want to experiment, but what type of experiment? Is it wacky? Is it crazy? So the mood set piece that you've got to do as a leader, you've got to live and breathe this. And I think this is where we talk about confidence, conviction, connection. You've got to be confident as a leader to experiment, but you've got to have conviction around the values that you hold. And that's the mood and the purpose. And then the connection piece is the final bit, which is how you're agile with your mood, your attitude. And as you say, sometimes those big failures or those failures that happen, sometimes you just need to spend a bit of time with a team coaching. Just it's sometimes I describe it as wallowing. Sometimes people will take a while to get through things, but it's as a leader, your role is to support them and listen to them. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you're trying to build a culture, so we're working right now with a number of clients who are really focusing on trying to create courageous cultures. And part of that is, what do you do with ideas that don't work? What do you do when people make mistakes? And how do you make that okay? How do you embed that into your systems and processes? I worked for a big guy where it was very hard to make mistakes. There was a terminology, you're in the penalty box. Like if you screwed up, that's a leader would say that to you. You're in the penalty box.
Yeah.
Right? That creates fear. And that fear is going to prevent people from experimenting, and they're going to play it safe, and they're going to do it the way it's always been done. And I don't think you can survive in this world that way. So that's why I think there is such a renewed focus now on more people being willing to create these courageous cultures. How do you make it cultural if you've got a whole organization that you're trying to put this in place?
So for me, it's about creating playgrounds. And what I mean by that is, if you think about it, when a top sports person is on the line 100 meters, they've done all the hard work before that. They've done the training. They've got everything, the mindset, the mood sets. They've worked up. They've got the muscles. There's nothing they can do on that start line apart from run the race. Yeah. Now they can screw it up at that time because the mindset, the mood set, but they've done all the hard work. So how often in a sales environment do we practice? How often would we get actors in, like we use for our businesses, to practice, to have a go? How often do we say, we've tried this 5 different times and we've never got into this client. Let's get some actors, or let's get ex-clients to come in and get them to play a character and practice a different route to go with. Now, we've all got networks that we rely on, firstly, when we need a new job and we've been made redundant or we're on the market. But how often do we actually work on network in between to get together and share? And during the pandemic, for example, part of a group called ISA, but we had networks going where we were sharing what was going on. We were practicing. We were thinking about techniques of virtual for Zoom. I was one of the people who said, never use Zoom. Yeah, it'll all be face-to-face. So getting that practice. So if you think about special forces, you think about sports people, even actors, they will practice their art. So how often do we practice our art and try it and get it wrong? And by doing that in a safe place, when you get to the real events, it's those trigger moments that will just naturally, you'll go into the right mode. It'll set you up for success. So that's what I would encourage in any team, is to set aside playgrounds and practice time.
Set aside playgrounds. I really, really like that concept. I'm laughing about your thing about Zoom, because one of our largest clients, as we were building right before the pandemic, we built this whole case with them about why they should invest to fly all their people in. And it was going to be really significant expense. And we built this whole business case of why the in-person was so important. 3 weeks later, I'm saying, you can do it over Zoom.
You can.
and let's stay the course. And it's really interesting because we did, and we built, it was a very extensive program. And because we were able to pivot to the space learning over time, I actually think the program was more robust because we were able to do it more rolled out, and, the build. So it's interesting. So I think, in terms of being more wrong, I was saying the same thing. You can't beat the in-person. And then I think I was wrong about that. In this circumstance, this really served them well to be able to do it in small cohorts, spaced learning over time. And I think it's both. I think there's times for both. I think there's times to be in person, there's times to be virtual. But I have learned had to change my mindset a good bit about what effective looks like in the learning and development world.
I would agree. And also it's playing with different platforms. So we've explored with Mural is the other one that's out there. But I now do my coaching online on the camera, but I hardly look at the person I'm coaching. I'm on Miro and I'm writing Post-it notes as we go along the coaching. So my coaching notes are live. So they can get on and play around with the Post-it notes. So there's an experiment where we're creating the tapestry of their coaching conversation live at the same time. Now, some people say, "Oh, but you're not listening," but actually, they feel I am because I'm writing it. They're
Yeah.
able to play with it and tweak it. So therefore, I'm starting to think, so how would we, say with VR coming up, and we're using VR now, how would we immerse something like DE&I into VR in this virtual world? And we're getting better results in the VR because people are able to immerse at a desk in an office, and they can't see anything. They're in that world. They're being themselves. So the immersion piece of virtual is getting better. I'm a big Zoom fatigue sufferer, though. So by the end of the day, I'm ready for a normal conversation or silence. But yeah, VR and other places, there are other
Yes,
technologies.
my son last night said, "Can you get on this parent-teacher thing with our track team at 7:30 at night?" And we had been facilitating an all-day operational excellence rally for one of our clients, and I had to say, "No,
No.
I can't." Yes. So we only have a few minutes left, and I want to make sure if you've got any additional sound bites of wisdom around this topic that you have not yet shared. I know you've got a whole book and lots of curriculum around it, but what would be, if you had 3 minutes left, how would you end?
Well, I think for me, there's a journey to be more wrong, and there's a journey to where you're going, and therefore living a life as a series of small experiments is the only way you're going to be resilient as a leader. And if we think about leaving our ego and expertise at the door, the biggest issue for me that gets in the way of leaders is their ego and their expertise and having the knowledge. And as Michael Bungay-Stanley would say in The Advice Trap, giving that advice. So for me, to be more wrong, you've got to leave your ego and your expertise as a manager at the door, and you've got to allow your team to thrive in that. So collaboration, compassion, listening, coaching, mentoring, be the servant leader in there, and then your teams can thrive and fly. And guess what? They're going to have fun doing it. It's not often at school that you get the chance to say, go and have a go. And if you fail, that's okay. We've learned. Yeah. So that's what I would encourage them to leave your ego and expertise at the door. Yeah.
Beautiful. So where can people get your book? What else would you like us to know about it? How do we find you?
So two things, if I can, Karin. One is the 500. We're just launching that. So it's a program looking at equity in society, and we're experimenting around that. So that's going to be live coming up this year. So shout out. But if you want to hear more about that and the book, BeMoreWrong.com, hashtag BeMoreWrong. If you want to follow. And I'm doing a 30-day LinkedIn sprint at the moment. So if you want to see me failing miserably on LinkedIn in terms of wording, you can follow me on LinkedIn and have a go, because we're having fun on there. We've created a playground to practice our LinkedIn, and it's an interesting time. Yeah.
Nice. Well, Colin, I would just really love to thank you so much for your amazing insights today. I look forward to seeing you in person and at the ISA conference, where we're both speaking in March. It'll be great to shake your hand.
It will. Sunshine and warmth, Karin. Sunshine and warmth will be lovely.
All right. Thank you again.
Thank you for inviting me.
So we're delighted. We have a tremendous lineup coming soon on Asking for a Friend. Next, we have Heather Younger, who is going to be talking about the art of caring leadership, which is so important. And then Whitney Johnson, author of Smart Growth, just finished her book, her brand new book coming out. Looking forward to having her. And then my good friend Julie Winkle Giulioni, who you've seen on this show before, but she has another new book out called She's the author of Promotions Are So Yesterday. So thanks so much for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you next time on Asking for a Friend.